Excellencies, heads of state and government from across Africa, including His Excellency Roch Marc Christian Kabore, President of Burkina Faso, Her Excellency Saleh Wok Zewde, President of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, and His Excellency Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta, represented by Cabinet Secretary Betty Maina of Industrialization, Trade and Enterprise Development, and also His Excellency Zeli Randria Mantantani, Minister of Public Health, sitting in for President Andre Rajoelina of Madagascar. United Nations Deputy Secretary General Amina J. Mohammed, UNIDO Director General Li Yong, Undersecretary of the United Nations and Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, ECA, Vera Songwe, Undersecretary General and Special Advisor on Africa to the United Nations Secretary General Christine Duarte, organizers and co-organizers, captains of industry, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the third Industrial Development Decade for Africa, IDDAIII 2016 to 2025.
Yes, there is.
My name is Jeff Koinange, and I will be your guide in the next couple of hours as we tackle the various challenges of strengthening Africa's pharmaceutical industry, learning lessons from COVID-19. We're going to kick off this session with opening remarks, and for that, I'd like to invite my good friend, Mr. Li Yong, Director General of the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, UNIDO, to welcome you all. Mr. DG, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Jeff, my very good friend. I really would like to see you here, moderate this important event. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it has almost become a tradition for us to organize a high-level event for the promotion of the third Industrial Development Decade for Africa, IDDAIII, at the margins of the General Assembly High-Level Week. Today, I have the particular pleasure of welcoming you to an event dedicated to the strengthening Africa's pharmaceutical industry. The timing could not be more appropriate as the COVID-19 pandemic exposed several aspects that are important for the future of the continent. On one side, the COVID-19 crisis set back development progress of years and further deepened inequalities among them, the digital divide. On the other side, the pandemic reminds us of how connected the world is and how critical international cooperation is to address the threats that know no borders. It was surely an encouraging achievement that within less than 12 months, several research teams developed vaccines to protect from the virus. It is less encouraging that the global rollout of vaccines is progressing at a very different speed. Less than 3% of the almost 6 billion doses given globally have been administered in Africa. This vaccine inequity puts survival rates and the prospects of economic recovery at risk. The experience of 2020 has highlighted Africa's vulnerability to supply shocks. It has underlined the need for greater self-sufficiency in production of vaccines, essential medicines, diagnostics, and other health products. Excellencies, crises such as COVID-19 pandemic can be stimulus to do things differently and build a better future. We are now halfway into a third Industrial Development Decade for Africa and have the opportunity to redouble our support for Africa. Strengthening the health industries in Africa has been long established objective for the continent, and a substantial progress has been made. UNIDO has been supporting the development of the local pharmaceutical manufacturing since 2006, and is a proud partner for the Pharmaceutical Manufacturing Plan for Africa, and to be working with the West Africa Health Organization and the ECOWAS Commission. Building on these experiences, we have established a new strategic health industry initiative and look forward to bringing the full weight of our services, capabilities, and partnerships to bear. Excellencies, strengthening the pharmaceutical industry in Africa must be a priority. The African continent free trade area provides welcome opportunities for development of the continental health industry, while we need to continue to harness the strength of the different stakeholders, put in place robust partnerships. We have a responsibility to seize the opportunities and must find ways to work together to deliver on this vital undertaking. I look forward to today's discussion and to work ever more closer with our African partners and the international community to achieve this important priority for the continent. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Lee Young, my good friend, Director General, United Nations Industrial Development Organization. Thank you so much for setting the stage. We're now going to go on to recorded remarks by Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, Amina J. Mohammed. Please take a listen.
Excellencies, it is often said that we must never waste a crisis. The COVID-19 pandemic is an opportunity for the world to recover better together. There's still time to do so, putting the SDGs back on track. For Africa, recovering better also means strengthening the continent's health systems, including its pharmaceutical industry. Today's high-level event of the IDDAIII puts a spotlight on this opportunity, which could be truly transformative in the continent's trajectory towards the 2030 agenda. Even before the COVID-19 pandemic, the manufacturing of safe, effective, and affordable pharmaceutical products in Africa was recognized as a priority for the industry. It was central to multilateral initiatives including IDDAIII, the African Union's Agenda 2063, and the AU's Pharmaceutical Manufacturing Plan for Africa, and the Action Plan for the Accelerated Industrial Development of Africa. In addressing the health sector, one must recognize that infectious and non-communicable diseases pose a growing threat to people's health and to the prosperity of individuals, communities, and societies. It is critical, therefore, to promote the development of a competitive and sustainable pharmaceutical manufacturing sector in Africa. This will contribute to the continent's progress towards improved health for all and to its economic growth. The COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated the vulnerability of African countries to the disease response. Africa relies on importing between 70% to 90% of their vaccines, medicines, and other health products. Therefore, when supply chains broke down, Africa was the first to suffer the health and socio-economic effects. This must change. We must strengthen policy and partnership frameworks for a continent-wide health industry, sharing knowledge and technologies, and facilitating investments. That is the only way to ensure quality, access and affordability, and to safeguard the health and well-being of all Africans. The African Continental Free Trade Area opens new opportunities and creates a $250 billion pharmaceuticals market with the potential for further growth. Building on calls for greater production and the strong political will of African heads of state, the African Development Bank is also developing a 2030 vision for Africa's pharmaceutical industry. Let us use the momentum of these initiatives to drive the production of affordable and high-quality medicines for Africa. Today's high-level event can offer critical ideas and solutions to help advance Africa's self-reliance in terms of pharmaceuticals, medicines, and healthcare products. In responding to the pandemic, Africa also has the impetus to prepare for the next pandemic through the lessons and opportunities of today. You can count on the United Nations and our presence across Africa as you change the game. Thank you.
And thank you, DSG, driving the momentum. Thank you for saying it as it is. We're going to go on to remarks by His Excellency Albert Muchanga. He's Africa Union Commissioner for Economic Development, Trade and Industry and Mining. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Director of this important ceremony. and I greet each and everyone in this panel, high-level segment. I do so against the background that the third industrial development decade for Africa runs from 2016 to 2025. And as we go through this high-level segment this year, we are all left with about 4 or 5 years before we come to the end of the decade. And when we do so, I think we must all look back with satisfaction that Africa has truly industrialized. And there are several opportunities, the key plank being the African Continental Free Trade Area, which opens up strong possibilities for the development of manufacturing and agro-processing. It's a market with a large population, aggregated at close to 1.3 billion as we speak now. And by 2030, it should be about 1.7 billion people. And a key component of that is a young population. The median age of Africa is about 19 years. And within that, we also have a growing middle class. As we learn experience from the COVID-19 pandemic, a number of critical issues come up. And the first one is that Africa has been on the receiving end of medicines and protective equipment, personal protective equipment. When the pandemic broke out, there was complaint that Africa was not receiving enough personal protective equipment. And when the vaccines were rolled out, Africa is still complaining that she has not received enough vaccines. As a result of that, less than 5% of the African population has been vaccinated. Our target was that by July this year, 60% of the Africans should have been vaccinated. So we are far below the target. How do we end the culture of being on the receiving end? That's the key question which this high-level panel might discuss. And it's a key lesson. The key lesson is that Africa does not do very well when it is on the receiving end. And our take as African Union is that as we develop the African Continental Free Trade Area, as we promote manufacturing, as we promote agro-processing, we need also to invest in research and development so that we develop internal capabilities for generation of products instead of having to wait all the time. And in this activity, and this is another key lesson, we need to collaborate. We need to collaborate. We need to collaborate. Doing it alone will not help. Trying to elbow each other will not help. If we have to exploit synergies, the key is to collaboration. So as we move now towards 2025, and as we go through the process of strengthening Africa's pharmaceutical industry, we need to have very clear parameters on effective collaboration. And this comes against the background that right now, a major component of Africa's pharmaceutical products end up being counterfeit products, which are not good for the health of each and every one of us. These are my opening remarks, and we look forward to a high level of segment that will come up with the forward-looking proposals on how to transform Africa's pharmaceutical industry so that each and every African has access to safe and affordable pharmaceutical products. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Albert Muchanga, AU Commissioner for Economic Development, Industry and Mining. It's all about collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. Very well put. Up next, I'd like to invite Ms. Vera Songwe. She's the Under Secretary General of the United Nations and Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, the ECA. Vera, you have the floor. Vera, are you with us? If you can hear me, Vera. Okay, there you go. Vera, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Go ahead.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me start by, first of all, congratulating DG Lee Yong of UNIDO for bringing us together again. It is true that we're meeting, last year we didn't meet per se. We're meeting in this difficult COVID circumstances, and it's amazing. And again, thank you, DG, for doing this, but also not only for us meeting, but for us meeting, I think, on something, as you said in your introduction, that is particularly important, which is the pharmaceutical industry on the continent. In the last few conversations we've talked about the third industrial revolution, the fourth industrial revolution, how Africa gets there. In those times, we were talking a little bit in the abstract, but now we are here today, DG, to talk about something that is I think, seizing all of us and calling our attention. So, Your Excellency, the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, Amina Mohammed, we heard her tape. His Excellency Gerd Muller, the Minister of Economic Cooperation and Development of Germany, Christina Duarte, my sister and dear friend, Under Secretary General and Special Advisor to the United Nations, Commissioner Muchanga, we just heard from him, and all the other distinguished guests. Thank you for being here with us again today. Again, very impressive. I joined a little bit at the test session, and I saw all the representatives from heads of states offices, excellencies, distinguished ladies. I think this is an important, and I think it speaks to the importance that we are giving this conversation. Of course, Paolo Gomez, who is representing the private sector, Mr. Mayaki, with whom I was in New York yesterday. Let me just start by saying, with this COVID pandemic, we've seen 2 or 3 things happen. And one of them is what I call dynamic divergence. It's really the conversation around how far away the world is from each other, where, we've seen divergence on macroeconomic outcomes, but also the macroeconomic reaction. We've seen that, a lot of the developing world has not been able to have access to the resources that it needs to respond to the crisis. The developed world has given itself $20 trillion in fiscal stimulus to be able to respond to this crisis. The developing world has only been, and $20 trillion is about 20% of developed world GDP. The developing world has only succeeded in giving itself 1% of GDP to respond to this crisis. Huge divergence in the way we respond. Now, when we talk about COVID-19, which is why we're here in the pharmaceutical sector, the Economic Commission for Africa has done 2 reports. The first report showed that 95% of Africa's pharmaceutical related needs are imported. 55% from Europe, 13% from China, 12% from India, 10% from the United States. All of these imports, again, divergence. One, first of all, we don't produce. But secondly, when COVID hit and when we needed pharmaceutical assets the most of these countries hit export bans on the products that Africa needs. So we were exposed not only from the COVID-19, but we were exposed because we could not acquire the goods. And thirdly, we were exposed because Of course, the prices of all of this went up, but we did not have the resources or the fiscal stimulus, as I just said before, to be able to respond. These are very important things that we now need to relook at the global foundations of how, as a multilateral system, we work. What has happened since? The African Union, as Commissioner Muchanga said, under the leadership of Cyril Ramaphosa, came together and said, how can Africa do this and respond? Africa created the African Medical Supplies Platform, which essentially helped Africa get all the COVID PPEs together on a pool procurement platform. It allowed us as a continent, working with Afrexim Bank, Economic Commission for Africa, under the leadership of course, President Ramaphosa, but also of Strive Masiwia, who is the special envoy on pharmaceuticals, to be able to ensure that we could get masks, we could get all the PPEs we needed at the right cost and in good time. So you never heard that Africa was short of PPEs. The second thing we then did was on vaccines. Essentially get together the African Vaccines Acquisition Task Team and start looking at how does one get vaccines. We all know today that the problem of vaccines is a supply problem. There are not enough vaccines being produced in the world. But even when they are, they're being kept by the developed world. That again is a huge divergence, because in the developed world, it's 1.3 trillion vials of vaccines, of doses of vaccines that are sitting there that are not being used, and Africa is at 5% vaccinated, with 55% vaccinated in the developed world, 55 to 60%. And as you all know, we're talking about boosters. So a population of 60% vaccinated needs boosters, a population of 5% vaccinated, even with resources, because Africa has put $2.2 billion down with the help of Afrexim Bank to buy vaccines, but we can't. And so we do need to look at why, and that's why this session is important. How can we produce vaccines on the continent? Africa has been producing for a long time animal vaccines. So we have the base technology. In places far afield like Mali and Central African Republic, you can find animal vaccine production, Cameroon, of course in Senegal and in South Africa and in Kenya and in Egypt, we're already producing vaccines. And so we can increase the scale. So I think that this conversation really is about how we bring together the technology on the continent, the financing on the continent, to ensure that we can do this and do this in a sustainable way. But again, beginning to put together health security and economic growth. If our health security is at risk, our economic growth is clearly at risk. And these are things we must bring back to the continent. The analysis of the Economic Commission for Africa, and I'm closing, shows that by importing most of our health pharmaceuticals from outside the continent, we are actually exporting 6 million jobs. A continent that needs to create somewhere between 13 to 16 million jobs every year cannot afford to export 6 million jobs because it's buying all of its pharmaceutical products from outside. So again, this conversation about pharmaceutical production on the continent, not just for COVID. We need more malaria vaccines than we need COVID vaccines. We need more rubeola vaccines. We did a study at the Economic Commission for Africa that showed 4 diseases that can be cured with vaccines kill 250 million kids a year on the continent. And this does not include the COVID, it's rubeola, malaria, and 2 other diseases. So I think there is a market for vaccines on the continent. We consume most of it. And so having this conversation on production is particularly important. Thank you so much for your attention. Again, thank you, DG Lee Young, for doing this.
And thank you, Vera. You put it right there, bringing together technology and finance. And that's what we're going to be talking about in a little later on. In the meantime, I'd like to invite Ms. Cristina Duarte. She's the Undersecretary General and Special Advisor on Africa to the United Nations Secretary General. Cristina, if you can hear us, you have the floor.
Thank you, Jeff. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. According to WHO, Africa is home of 11% of the world's population, and yet the region bears a disproportionate burden of diseases. Notably, with 60% of people living with HIV, more than 90% of the annual global malaria cases being in Africa, and over 50% of the world's infant mortality. Despite the efforts by the United Nations and Gavi to promote solidarity in the response to the COVID-19 through the COVAX facilitation mechanism, the hard reality is that COVAX is projected to cut its delivery forecast by 25% less doses than anticipated before the end of the year, due to export controls on vaccine doses and introduction of booster shots by some developed countries. The vaccine divide is there to increase. This reality check leads to one clear conclusion, with my dear sister Vera already spotting. The development of Africa's own pharmaceutical industry is the only way forward to ensure the continent's resilience and achieve sustainable development. But the pandemic has also shed light on certain intellectual property related challenges with regard to improving access to technology and knowledge and know-how, which are the basis for industrialization. Last June, the deadline for LDCs to protect intellectual property under the WTO agreement on TRIPS has been extended until July 2034. There is a further LDC special transition period related on pharmaceutical products, which is valid until January 2033. This is the right time to revisit and craft national intellectual property legislative and policy frameworks in a way that effectively advances industrialization. And the ongoing negotiations in phase 2 on intellectual property rights, investment and competition policy of the Continental Free Trade Area also provides prospects to agree on an optimal intellectual property rights framework at regional level. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, ongoing African Union initiatives such as the Pharmaceutical Manufacturing Plan for Africa, the African Medicines Regulatory Harmonization Initiative, the African Medicines Agency, the Partnerships for African Vaccine Manufacturing, as well as the IDDAII's Pandemic Resilience Accelerator for African health-related business, provide a roadmap to achieve this goal. It is time to draw a new narrative on Africa and from Africa to serve African people. Industrialization is the key to address the continent's vulnerabilities. Again, my dear Vera has spotted very well. And pharmaceutical industries are critical to strengthen our most valuable asset, human capital. The 2021 Global Innovation Index reported that Africa is the region with the highest number of economies performing above expectation on innovation, which underlines the great potentials of our continent. Let's take the challenge and transform this crisis into an opportunity to leapfrog towards sustainability. OSA is ready to advance towards this goal. Thank you very much. Back to you, Jeff.
Thank you, Christina. Let's take the challenge that you said, absolutely 100%. And this is the kind of conversation we should be having. I really appreciate that. Up next, Paolo Gomez. He's the co-chair of Afro Champions Initiative. Paolo, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Jeff. I would like to recognize here the presence of the president of Burkina Faso online, the director of UNIDO, our sister Vera, and Mr. Mushanga has been an ally for all this fight, and many more. So it's a pleasure for us to be here representing more or less the private sector in all this journey. I think we came from a very difficult moment of our history where the world basically was put in an induced coma. The good news is that Africa did not panic. We had immediately the AU playing a strong leadership, and my sister Vera has emphasized that. But what was even more important is how African institutions have worked together in an environment where everybody again was panicking. You had in an instant entity like the Economic Community for Africa, Africa Exim Bank, the African Development Bank, the African Union, and the private sector together to find solutions. And I think if we keep this software of execution, I think we'll be ready to face the next pandemic. The other good news is the ability very quickly for the AU to give all the support to the CDC with the strong leadership that the director Kenosong has immediately played in advising and supporting African countries. So here it's important to keep the same momentum as we face the pandemic, because we still have challenges, but also to prepare for the next one. And to do that, for sure, it's important to keep the momentum with industrialization, which is not anymore a dirty world. I think everybody now agree that Africa has to get into its industrialization. We all recommend for a green industrialization, but the only way to really absorb all the youth and job we need is to really Africa to start industrialization process and be able to hire people and also create value chain. For that to happen, we need also to create a critical mass mark of African multinationals. African multinationals will work with small and medium enterprise. As you know, 90% of our small and medium enterprise have less than 10 people working in those companies. And I think this is where I think the reservoir of creation of job and opportunity has to be supported. And we have to link it with the pharmaceutical industry. The other good news is that we have been able to map out the policy that's needed. Many institutions, many private consulting firms, for example, the role that McKinsey have played in many countries, including Senegal, in helping reframe the policies and put in place the incentives that need to be put in place in the country in order to attract pharma companies. In our side, as AFO champion, what we have tried to do is to immediately start getting involved in execution. And one pilot project that we have started with a consortium of many private sector companies in Africa is Pharmapolis in Senegal. It will be a dedicated 200-hectare site with energy provided by solar energy provided to the park, and attract R&D, but also research institute, pharmaceutical company, many African pharmaceutical company, the small one that will grow, because it's important also for us to explain to people that all these companies in Africa will not grow in less than 5 years. It takes time to create that capability. But also those companies will create an environment where we will focus on diseases that are specific to Africa. As Vera mentioned, we have to make sure to keep an eye on the ball, that some of the diseases are particularly affecting the continent, and we have to focus on that. Vaccine is important, but certainly we have to also go for drugs that address diseases like diabetes, who's growing with the consuming class in many of our countries, and probably will get worse if we don't attack it at this point very, very quickly. I think we'll need also a partnership with many other countries in many other regions. We have seen this spirit of vaccine nationalism that I think we have to be extremely attentive and careful about it. We haven't attained the goals of the number of people who wanted to be vaccinated, precisely because there's this excess of attention for many people and the panicking that we saw in many parts of the world about this issue of vaccine. Some of the recommendations, I think, to continue to build this momentum about the African institutions is the work that Vera and many others have done to push for the SDR. I think we'll recommend very quickly that part of the SDR that hasn't been allocated, totally allocated or taken from some countries, to be used to support the African Development Bank, the African Exim Bank, and give them the boost, because access to capital will be very important also to support the growing field of the pharmaceutical company. I will stop here. I think we needed to be short. The key word here is that we have to move for implementation. The leadership is here. The software of working together has worked during this period of pandemic, where Africa, again, didn't panic. I think we have to continue this mindset and make progress. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, Paolo. Working on that software will go a long way. Thanks so much. Folks, if you don't mind indulging me just for a moment, because we've got two heads of state who have been listening in from the top of the hour, and two senior ministers of government. I'd like, because we do have more speakers scheduled to speak. The African Development Bank is on standby. AUDA NEPAD is on standby, the German Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development standing by, European Union, also West African Health Organization, all standing by to give their remarks. Just for a moment, indulge me as we switch over and I introduce the heads of state, and we just talk about that for a moment, and then we'll come back to this very important topic. So I'd like to introduce His Excellency Roch-Marc Christian Kabore is President of the Republic of Burkina Faso. He's online right now. Also, Her Excellency Sahle-Work Zewde. She's the President of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia. We've also got Cabinet Secretary for Industrialization, Trade, Enterprise and Development, Betty Maina, representing President Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta of Kenya. And we've also got His Excellency Zelny Randriaramantanti, Minister for Public Health, representing His Excellency Andre Rajoelina, President of Madagascar. So before we go to opening statements, I'd like to go straight, because there is a joint declaration by the Kenya government and UNIDO. So Betty Maina, there's a self-starter program. I know you have some remarks from President Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta after your remarks, and then you and the deputy, or rather the DG of UNIDO, will sign or virtually sign that joint declaration. So Betty Maina, you go first.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Excellencies, President of Burkina Faso and President of Ethiopia, the UNIDO Director General, Mr. Lee Yong, and other distinguished guests. Greetings wherever you are in the world. We want to thank you very much, and President Kenyatta thanks you very much for inviting us to this high-level meeting on IDDAIII, and he has sent me to represent him. This third decade for industrialization in Africa anchors Africa on a path of inclusive and sustainable industrial development that would transform African countries into locations of competitive industrial production. We remain committed to the vision of IDDAIII, which is consistent with the African Union's Agenda 2063 that seeks to prioritize growth, industrialization, and jobs in the next 3 decades. Despite impressive growth rates recorded in Africa since 2000, our continent still lags behind in terms of the structural transformation necessary to achieve socially inclusive and environmentally sustainable development. Africa requires an increase in industrialization, greater economic diversification, and the strengthening of the framework conditions that drive competitive economic growth and development. To achieve this, African countries must become more competitive in industrial production. We need to strengthen the key elements of industrial productive capacity, such as infrastructure, innovation, and technology transfer, industrial financing, industrial knowledge, and the skills and the upgrade the support from both public and private sector institutions that regulate or advocate for industrial development. Various development interventions and broad-based partnerships are required to improve the enabling framework, as well as to encourage productive and efficient industrial investment ventures in Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, the theme for this meeting, which is a focus on the pharmaceutical sector, is timely and resonates well with the scenario the continent is facing today in terms of accessing COVID-19 vaccines. While other regions are experiencing a COVID-19 vaccine surplus, Africa's situation is one of severely limited supplies, despite huge local demand, and other speakers have spoken to that. The key factor in this is the inability of African countries to locally produce COVID-19 vaccines. The Africa Continental Free Trade Area will be a game changer in incentivizing this. The COVID-19 pandemic brought with it global and domestic lockdowns that resulted in severe constraints on productivity, and disruption of supply chains in all sectors of our economies. Among the most severely affected were the health sectors of developing nations, particularly those of us in Africa, due to their heavy reliance on imported pharmaceuticals and other medical supplies produced by companies in developed countries. This situation brought to the fore the urgency in African countries developing efficient and effective local and regional pharmaceutical and medical equipment industries that can meet national, regional, continental, and even global needs. Our present situation reinforces the urgency in accelerating self-reliance in pharmaceuticals and medical commodities. The positive impacts on Africa's health systems are incalculable. With local production that meets domestic demand, African nations will be better able to address the health needs and challenges within their borders, while at the same time conserving their scarce foreign exchange reserves as a result of replacing imports with domestic products. Although pharmaceutical products are currently manufactured in countries such as South Africa, Kenya, Morocco, and Egypt, as a whole, Africa currently imports more than 80% of its pharmaceutical and medical consumables. This situation, ladies and gentlemen, is not sustainable. In East Africa, we have formulated a regional pharmaceutical manufacturing plan of action for the period 2017 to 2027. This plan calls for the identification, development, and adoption of new strategies focused on supporting the production of advanced pharmaceuticals and medical equipment for non-communicable diseases, APIs, and excipients, veterinary requirements, as well as harnessing the potential traditional medicines and natural products. Further, our plan emphasizes the need for research and development, strategic use of IPRs, benefit sharing, and incentives to attract interest and investment in niche areas among our countries, so as to enhance self-reliance in the region. Among the strategies we have articulated in this plan are the decrease of dependency on pharmaceutical imports from outside the African continent from more than 70% to less than 50%. 2, support to the expansion of the product portfolio of farms in the region to cater for more than 90% of our disease conditions. The implementation of preferential procurement regulations, such as a requirement that at least 50% of purchases by the national procurement agencies be sourced from pharmaceutical companies in the region, and identification and support of pharmaceutical and medical equipment manufacturing companies who will produce more advanced pharmaceutical formulations, injectables, double-layer tablets, among others. These strategies will require that we develop a roadmap with clear milestones. Further, we need to take into consideration the need to adhere to global good manufacturing practices, be guided by market intelligence data, incentivize potential investors, and apply a coherent policy framework across various regional blocs in Africa. While we have made great strides in Kenya in producing some of our pharmaceutical products that are most commonly produced by the public, there remains a vast untapped potential for further gains. We've also made some strides in the production of medical commodities that are consumed in our country. Our course has been given further impetus by our desire to produce COVID-19 vaccines locally. The government of Kenya shall continue to support the local manufacture of these essential items by according preference to locally produced goods and services. Kenya will also continue to strengthen the enabling business environment in order to ensure that pharmaceutical and medical equipment manufacturers are established and grow. We are also making every effort to encourage women, youth, and persons living with disabilities to establish enterprises in the sector by according them preferential access to government procurement opportunities, availing them with lower cost finance, and giving them tax reliefs to boost their working capital. We cherish our collaboration with our development partners, and we commit to strengthening our partnerships in financial and non-financial resource mobilization at the multilateral level, regional and bilateral levels as well. Once again, I want to thank you most sincerely for the invitation to address this gathering, and we want to thank UNIDO for finding it fit to work with us. I thank you.
Thank you, Betty Maina, Cabinet Secretary, Industrialization, Trade and Enterprise Development, Republic of Kenya. Speaking on behalf of President Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta, I'm going to bring in the Director General of UNIDO, Mr. Lee Yong, to respond to that, and after which we will do virtual signing of the joint declaration. So DG, if you're there, please, we can respond. Yeah. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, Jeff. Excellencies, also, I just would like to extend my heartfelt appreciation to the President, Republic of Burkina Faso, President of Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor for me to listen to the very strong statement from the Kenya government for the pharmaceutical industry development strategy for the country and for the continent. It is a great honor to join His Excellency Minister in signing the joint declaration on the implementation of Kenya's self-starter program for country partnership following the launch event we held in January. Actually, that was a great event. I'm pleased that the government of Kenya views the program for country partnership as a critical tool for the economic recovery for manufacturing sector from the COVID-19 crisis and the development of the local pharmaceutical manufacturing. I'm very, very confident the program will accelerate implementation of Kenya's industrial development priorities in a truly multi-stakeholder partnership approach and contribute to the position Kenya strongly in the intra-regional trade in value-added goods in the East Africa community, in CAMESA and in the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. I would like to thank you, Your Excellency, for your personal commitment to supporting the achievement of Pan-Africa aspiration by adopting the PCP model. Your government has committed to contribute in a concrete manner and to the attainment of the objectives of IDDAIII. I would like to assure you, Excellency, that UNIDO and our IDDAIII partners present here today will provide necessary support throughout the implementation of the self-starter PCP. And of course, I really, really appreciate the strong support from President of Kenya, President Uhuru Kenyatta of Kenya, give us such a big support and the confidence to move the IDDAIII agenda in Kenya. This is a great moment for me to join you, Your Excellency, in signing the joint declaration. Asanteni sana.
So can we see that signing virtually? Is that okay? Just symbolically, and then we can go on?
Yeah, yes, yes. Yeah.
There you go. Thank you. This is the self-starter program for country partnership. Thank you so much. Okay, there you go.
Yeah, we will exchange. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Cabinet Secretary, Amina, Industrialization, Trade and Enterprise Development. I appreciate you both so much. We're going to go on with this session, by the way, which is entitled Learning the Lessons from COVID-19, Improving Resilience of African Health Systems through Strengthening the Local Pharmaceutical Industry within the framework of the Africa Free Trade Agreement. So let me go all the way to West Africa and talk to His Excellency Roch-Marc Christian Kabore. He's the President of the Republic of Burkina Faso. And Excellence, if I can ask you, what measures do you suggest that African governments take to mobilize investment for Africa's pharmaceutical sector looking ahead post-pandemic?
Merci. Madame la Présidente de la République fédérale et démocratique d'Éthiopie, Monsieur le Directeur général de l'ONIDI, honorables personnalités à vos rangs, titres et grades respectifs, Mesdames et Messieurs. Cette rencontre de haut niveau consacrée au renforcement de l'industrie pharmaceutique en Afrique nous offre l'agréable opportunité de partager nos visions sur un sujet qui constitue une réelle source de préoccupation pour nos systèmes de santé. En effet, la pandémie de la COVID-19 nous a rappelé la fragilité des systèmes d'approvisionnement de nos services de santé en produits pharmaceutiques qui dépendent pour la plupart des importations. C'est pourquoi nos pays ont connu, durant la pandémie, des ruptures de stock du fait des ralentissements de l'activité des firmes pharmaceutiques internationales. Les drames liés à la COVID-19 et à l'ensemble des épidémies et d'autres affections que connaissent les pays africains peuvent être évités ou circoncis si nos États conjuguent leurs efforts pour trouver et mettre en œuvre des solutions adaptées, notamment en ce qui concerne les produits de santé. De nombreuses initiatives prises par l'Union africaine dans le but de promouvoir la production locale des produits de santé tardent à prendre corps. Nous saluons l'engagement pris afin de permettre, à la faveur de la COVID-19, à certains pays de produire des vaccins tels que le Sénégal, le Rwanda et l'Afrique du Sud. Aujourd'hui, de nombreux pays africains ont des projets de création d'unités de production pharmaceutique, et ce, de manière isolée, tout en partageant la conviction selon laquelle nous devons développer notre propre industrie pharmaceutique pour éviter de vivre les difficultés déjà endurées, aggravées par la COVID-19. Nous sommes partisans d'une meilleure mise en synergie de nos efforts allant de la recherche à la mise en œuvre sur le marché de produits finis en passant par une bonne maîtrise de l'approvisionnement en matières premières. C'est pourquoi nos États devront privilégier la production locale, les formes génériques de produits à forte demande pour permettre leur accessibilité à moindre coût. Par contre, pour les produits de spécialité, les vaccins et d'autres produits coûteux, cela gagnerait à faire l'objet de partenariats entre les pays d'une même sous-région dans le but de mutualiser les efforts d'investissement. Une telle complémentarité renforcerait non seulement nos capacités à produire pour répondre aux besoins de nos populations, mais en plus et surtout nous permettrait de faire un grand progrès en matière de recherche et développement de nouveaux médicaments. Nous notons un intérêt grandissant des investisseurs pour l'Afrique dans le domaine de l'industrie pharmaceutique. Cet intérêt devrait être accompagné par les pouvoirs publics pour favoriser l'établissement de partenariats entre les investisseurs internationaux et nationaux et les États pour accélérer l'industrialisation pharmaceutique de l'Afrique. C'est pourquoi nous pensons qu'il faut travailler à créer des partenariats actifs, aussi bien au plan international que national. Nous devons mettre en œuvre des incitations fiscales pour permettre justement la création de ces industries et détaxer les matières l'importation des matières premières entrant dans la production des produits pharmaceutiques. Enfin, nous devons mettre en œuvre un système de vérification, de certification de médicaments et de lutter contre les faux médicaments dans nos différents pays. S'agissant de mon pays, le Burkina Faso, un des défis à relever est la création rapide d'une capacité nationale de production de produits de santé afin de satisfaire les besoins d'accès des populations à des médicaments essentiels disponibles et abordables. C'est ainsi que pour l'opérationnalisation de la technopole pharmaceutique, nous avons sollicité l'accompagnement de l'ONIDI afin que nous puissions aboutir à un schéma d'industrialisation pharmaceutique qui intègre l'environnement sous-régional tout en prenant en compte les besoins non encore satisfaits de ces pays en matière de production de santé. La matérialisation de cette technopole pharmaceutique nécessitera l'appui des partenaires techniques et financiers. C'est pourquoi j'en appelle aux institutions financières internationales, aux agences spécialisées des Nations Unies pour qu'elles s'impliquent résolument dans les propositions d'industrialisation pharmaceutique en Afrique à la faveur des leçons tirées de la pandémie de la COVID-19. Je vous remercie.
Hey, merci beaucoup, Excellence. Thank you very much for your kind, wonderful, and straight, hard-hitting words there. Appreciate that. I'll go straight to the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa, and Her Excellency, Sahle-Work Zewde. She's the President of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia. Excellency, how do you think frameworks such as the Africa Free Trade Agreement and PMPA will be integrated into regional and continental to overcome the pandemic?
Very much, Jeff, and it's good to see you again. Monsieur le Président du Burkina Faso, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank you, first of all, for inviting Ethiopia to make a contribution to this important meeting. The fourth, Africa, as you know, has been left behind during the past industrial revolutions. And we should not allow ourselves to be left behind again this time around. In recent years, the ICT sector in Africa has grown, a trend that is likely to continue. Of late, mobile technologies and services have generated millions of jobs and contributed to billions of dollars of economic value and tax revenues. Digitalization has also resolved information asymmetry problems in the financial system and labor market, thus increasing efficiency and economic growth. Failure to capitalize on digital economy opportunities will impose considerable risk on African businesses who could fall further behind, exacerbating the global digital divide and lowering their global competitiveness. Key for capturing the opportunities created by the fourth industrial revolution is strengthening our local manufacturing capacity, particularly in the health sector. The COVID-19 pandemic has reinforced that African countries should produce medicine and medical supplies locally rather than importing from abroad, and this has been said by all the speakers. In-country production of generic drugs would help ensure access and affordability. Although the pharmaceutical sector has shown measurable growth, our continent still heavily relies on importing most of the active ingredients needed to produce medicines, demonstrating the need to give due attention to import substitution to manufacture such materials locally. Import substitution creates jobs, transfers skills, and safe foreign exchange. In addition to economic benefits, expanding our medical supply capacity would boost protection of our nations against future pandemics that disrupt global supply chain. Let me emphasize that setting up the complex supply chains required to produce quality pharmaceuticals can only be achieved through large-scale public-private partnerships. African governments must provide an enabling environment to encourage large investments from private sector pharmaceutical research and manufacturing companies by removing regulatory bottlenecks and expedite the transfer of skills, promotion of research, and establishment of efficient supply chains. We must really move beyond rhetoric and go into action. The transformation of African countries into locations of competitive industrial production requires the strengthening of key elements of industrial productive capacity, such as infrastructure, innovation, technology transfer, industrial financing, industrial knowledge and skills, and the support from public and private sector institutions. The Africa Continental Free Trade Area promises to integrate a market of 1.3 billion people and potentially 2.2 by 2050. And African manufacturers can be expected to enjoy significant economies of scale and scope down the road. Ethiopia is one of the first African countries to develop a national strategy and action plan for pharmaceutical manufacturing in order to grow exports, substitute imports, and improve access to medicines. In pursuit of its vision, the government has earmarked 10-year, like $15 billion investment portfolio for the development of state-of-the-art industrial parks. One of these parks is the Gelinto Industrial Park, just outside Addis Ababa, which is specializing in pharmaceutical manufacturing. These parks provide multiple benefits to investors, including tax exemptions, one-stop shop services, and price preference in public procurement. We hope that the establishment of such modern industrial infrastructure, coupled with improved logistics and custom services, will help to transform Ethiopia's manufacturing sector. I would like to acknowledge the instrumental role played by UNIDO and a number of multilateral and bilateral partners who have supported our industrial parks initiative as vehicles for inclusive and sustainable industrial development. Ethiopia is also engaging in policy reforms that will promote a shift from state-led to private sector-driven growth and economic transformation. Industrialization and privatization are at the heart of our homegrown economic reform agenda and our 10-year development plan. The COVID-19 pandemic and the effect on our economies has made it all more urgent to build resilience and sustainability, further strengthening the case for industrialization. To get there, Africa must see the pandemic as an opportunity to drive change, to invest in new business models, support innovation, and diversify in its products. The COVID-19 change, global markets gives added importance to developing local and regional supply chains to take advantage of a growing domestic market. This will mean giving full support to AFCFTA. Additionally, it would require concentrated measures to support manufacturing sectors, businesses, including services in technology upgrading, quality compliance, capacity development, product development, marketing, and investment promotion. To achieve all of these changes, we need the continued support of UNIDO and our longstanding development partners. So I urge you to continue supporting the third industrial development decade for Africa. I thank you.
Thank you to Her Excellency Salawok Zewde. As always, good to see you. Great work seeing the pandemic as an opportunity and moving beyond rhetoric. Thank you so much for that. We're going to go on to the island of Madagascar now, all the way to Antananarivo, where we find His Excellency Zeli Randria Mananantoni. He is the Minister for Public Health, and he's representing President Andry Rajoelina. Excellency, the question for you is, in what ways is your government working to protect and strengthen the most vital parts of the health industry, and your country post-pandemic?
Je vous remercie de m'avoir donné la parole. Monsieur le directeur général de l'ONUDI, Mesdames et Messieurs, membres de cette auguste assemblée, en vos rangs et grades respectifs, mes premiers mots sont ceux de Son Excellence Monsieur le Président de la République de Madagascar, qui aurait bien voulu assister à cette visioconférence, mais d'autres obligations non moins importantes l'ont retenu. Il m'a désigné pour assister à cette réunion à sa place. La pandémie à Covid-19 a été un événement majeur contre lequel aucun pays ne s'est finalement pas préparé correctement, et son arrivée soudaine a mis à mal de nombreux systèmes sanitaires, économiques et autres dans la plupart des pays où sévit actuellement la pandémie à Covid-19. Pour l'Afrique, il s'agissait d'une occasion pour montrer ses richesses et sa capacité de réponse face aux événements sanitaires majeurs, car comme nous le savons tous, l'Afrique a presque toujours été un continent d'où de nombreuses matières premières sont exportées vers d'autres pays occidentaux ou autres, dont la plupart sans transformation sont exportées et ces matières premières sont exportées en tant que matière brute. Ainsi, la plus-value ne revenait pas aux pays africains producteurs, mais pour les pays destinataires qui disposent finalement d'industries capables de procéder à la production de produits finis, notamment les médicaments qui entraient dans le cadre de Covid-19. Pour Madagascar, notre pays dispose de multitudes de plantes médicinales, dont plusieurs sont des plantes endémiques. Pour ne parler que de quelques plantes, la vincristine, un médicament anticancéreux utilisé pour lutter contre de nombreux types de cancers, est obtenu à partir d'une plante de Madagascar qui est la pervenche de Madagascar. Et les produits issus de cette plante sont exportés, au mieux semi-transformés, et ce sont les pays disposant d'industries pharmaceutiques qui produisent le produit final, la vincristine, qui va être revendu à des prix décuplés ou plus. Et ceci est le fruit de l'industrialisation dans ces pays. Certaines avancées ont été réalisées à Madagascar ces dernières années pour utiliser ces plantes et on les a transformées en ce qu'on appelle des remèdes traditionnels améliorés pour lesquels un certain degré de transformation a été réalisé, mais il ne s'agit pas de transformation que l'on peut qualifier de transformation industrielle. Certains pays comme la Chine ou l'Inde l'utilisent comme des médicaments, ces médicaments remèdes traditionnels améliorés, utilisés dans la pratique médicale courante. Étant donné qu'il s'agissait d'une maladie nouvelle, les efforts ont été menés à Madagascar, comme de par le monde, pour trouver le ou les médicaments efficaces pour traiter les patients atteints de Covid-19. Sous le leadership de son éminence, Monsieur le Président de la République de Madagascar, IDDAIII, la redynamisation de l'industrie pharmaceutique a été faite à travers la création d'une industrie pharmaceutique du nom de Pharmapolis. Il s'agit d'un des projets phares du président dans le but de produire dans un premier temps donc, des médicaments dont aurait besoin Madagascar, dont les remèdes traditionnels améliorés, et ce en utilisant les plantes médicinales malagasy. De plus, contre la COVID-19, Madagascar a pu réussir grâce à l'engagement personnel de son éminence, Monsieur le Président de la République, et de tout le gouvernement malagasy, grâce à la création de centres dédiés au recrutement de volontaires pour appuyer les agents de santé à la distribution de médicaments, ce remède traditionnel amélioré du nom de CVO, dans les districts et communes où l'on a constaté une élévation importante des cas. Dès qu'il y avait une élévation des cas, les médicaments traditionnels améliorés ont été distribués afin d'essayer de contenir le plus vite possible la maladie. Et grâce également à la mise en place d'un réseau de laboratoires sur tout le territoire malagasy pour procéder à la surveillance. Et actuellement, ce réseau est encore dans la suite de cette mise en place. Tout ceci a permis de faire en sorte qu'actuellement, on compte peu de cas positifs de Covid-19 à Madagascar. En d'autres termes, Madagascar a su exploiter et mettre en avant ces plantes médicinales afin de redynamiser un secteur presque oublié qui est la production industrielle de médicaments. Soyons fiers de notre continent qui est l'Afrique et saisissons tous l'occasion de mettre l'Afrique en avant. Saisissons cette occasion pour relancer l'industrie africaine à partir des matières premières locaux dont chacun des pays africains dispose afin de ne plus trop dépendre des pays non africains, car nous avons tous souffert des problèmes d'approvisionnement en médicaments et autres intrants de santé durant cette pandémie. Son Éminence, le président de la République de Madagascar, n'a pas oublié le soutien entre frères africains, car il a eu des échanges avec des chefs africains, à la suite desquels échanges, Madagascar est venu en aide pour la protection des populations. L'engagement de son Éminence, le président de la République, son leadership a permis, dans la lutte contre la COVID-19, une avancée majeure, qui est cette redynamisation de cette filière industrielle pharmaceutique à Madagascar. Pour terminer, cette production était au début réalisée sous forme de tisane, et au fur et à mesure de l'avancée de cette relance de l'industrie, on a eu une production de ces médicaments remèdes traditionnels améliorés sous forme de gélules, et ce projet phare de Madagascar a été un des éléments majeurs que Madagascar a pu mettre en avant donc durant cette lutte contre la COVID-19. Sur ce, Monsieur le directeur général de l'ONUDI, Mesdames et Messieurs, membres de cette auguste assemblée, je vous remercie pour votre aimable attention.
Et merci à vous, Excellences. Merci à vous, les Excellences. That was Zeli Driaramantananantani, Minister for Public Health in Madagascar. Merci beaucoup, Excellence Roch-Marc Christian Kabore, President of the Republic of Burkina Faso. Thank you so much, Her Excellency Salawak Zewde, President of the Federal Republic of Ethiopia. And thank you, Her Excellency Betty Minor, Cabinet Secretary, Industrialization, Trade and Enterprise Development here in Nairobi, Kenya. That was a great session, learning the lessons from COVID-19, moving forward. We have to move forward together as a continent. Before we get on to session 2, remember there were some remarks that we still left out at the beginning. I'd like to bring that in. And first up, I'd like to ask Dr. Abdul Mukhtar. He's the Director of African Development Bank, speaking on behalf of President Akumi Adesina. Dr. Mukhtar, you have the floor. Dr. Mukhtar, go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Jeff. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm making these remarks on behalf of Dr. Akumi Adesina, President of the African Development Bank. He sends his greetings and apologies for his inability to attend this very important and timely conversation convened by one of our most important partners, UNIDO. Thank you very much, Director General Lee Young and your team for your leadership and for convening this gathering. With COVID-19, we've witnessed the revival of protectionist behaviors, with countries keeping critical health products, pharmaceuticals, and vaccines for their own needs and banning exports. This is a threat for countries without or with limited manufacturing capabilities. Africa is heavily reliant on imports. Up to 70% of the pharmaceutical products and 99% of its vaccines are imported. This crisis can become the opportunity to revitalize the African pharmaceutical industry. Africa should aspire to boldly increase local production of both therapeutics and vaccines to achieve public health security. Working with global and African stakeholders, the African Development Bank has articulated a 2030 vision and plan to develop Africa's pharmaceutical industry and maximize its potential. This will be an investment in the future of Africa. We estimate that such a flourishing pharmaceutical system requires at least $11 billion in investments, excluding infrastructure, over the next decade. This will create hundreds of thousands of skilled jobs and generate over $5 billion in incremental manufacturing GDP. Many of the solutions mentioned this morning by previous speakers are an integral part of the plan, and it has detailed investment roadmap and pipeline of strategic initiatives and projects to execute. You can count on the African Development Bank as we move together forward boldly in securing Africa's health. We are determined to play a strong role as a credible and trusted African partner in this noble challenge through direct investments and providing leadership to support the development of the industry. We will provide upstream support to governments, work with our private equity investee firms, mobilize other MDBs, and use our African Investment Forum platform to bring in all relevant stakeholders. We will approach global pharma companies to relocate production to Africa to benefit from the African Continental Free Trade Area and future establishment of the African Medicines Agency. We'll also work with pharma industry associations in Africa, create capacity development links between universities and industry, and work with African scientists in the diaspora. Many of these initiatives are already underway and are being explored. I'm confident that this event will bring out our best to reshape the current reality of Africa's pharmaceutical industry, from fragility to resilience, from deficiency to self-sufficiency, and from weak to strong scientific and manufacturing capacities. Together, we'll make it the reality that we will be proud of. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Dr. Abdul Mukhtar. From fragility to resilience, 100% spot on. Thank you for your remarks. On behalf of IDDAIII, I'd like to now invite Ms. Jennifer Chiringa. She's going to speak on behalf of Mr. Ibrahim Asane Mayaki, who's the Chief Executive Officer of IDDAIII. Jennifer, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Your Excellencies, distinguished delegations, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. It's with great honor that I represent the CEO of IDDAIII to deliver his message to this august gathering. On behalf of Dr. Ibrahim Asane Mayaki, I extend the CEO's apologies for not being able to join this meeting today due to conflicting commitments. Dr. Mayaki has asked me to convey his appreciation to the partners for co-organizing this high-level side event and for the opportunity afforded to the agency to provide the perspectives and initiatives of IDDAIII in this area of our work. Allow me to highlight a number of key issues. Firstly, most industry experts believe the African pharmaceutical market was still on track to be a $60 billion market by year 2020. The attractiveness of Africa's pharma industry lies both in its market size as well as its rapid growth, with an estimated 9.8 compound annual growth rate between 2010 and 2020, compared with just 2% for the US and 1% for Japan. Over the next 5 years, strong growth can be expected in every segment of Africa's pharmaceutical market: prescription drugs, generics, over-the-counter medication, and medical devices. 3 factors will drive this growth. Firstly, the rise of major cities. Secondly, the expansion in healthcare capacity. And thirdly, the maturing of the business environment. This decade will see accelerated consolidation of pharma companies and fast growth of emerging markets, particularly in oncology and biologics. With generic pharma running out of ways to reinvent itself, they have few growth opportunities in their traditional markets. This will be the decade where Africa can deploy smart investments. This is particularly relevant in view of the ongoing COVID-19 crisis that has highlighted the need to strengthen Africa's productive capacities in health industries, as well as the imperative to increase health security, improve access to medicines, and contribute to improved health outcomes on the continent. Local manufacturing in the pharma sector holds the promise of creating modern jobs, fostering innovation, stimulating economic activities, and in many ways, increasing productivity and wealth creation on the continent. The African Continental Free Trade Area creates further opportunities for pooled procurement of essential medicines, larger markets, intra-Africa trade in pharmaceutical products, and incentives for developing the local industry. The Pharmaceutical Manufacturing Plan for Africa, PMPA, is born from the realization that dependence on imports is not sustainable and that health is a fundamental human right. The Pharmaceutical Manufacturing Plan is intentional about making sure that good quality medical products, including vaccines and related supplies, are accessible and affordable to all who need them. It is also deliberate about contributing contributing to the creation of a diversified and knowledge-based economy in Africa, given the nature of the pharmaceutical industry. To support the achievement of these aspirations, IDDAIII continues to build political momentum on the issue and to improve coherence across relevant policies through sector-specific projects. Our strategy is to continue to foster strategic collaboration with key partners and stakeholders, convened at platforms such as this one, with a number of aims in sight: to build the requisite financial and human resources, to improve access to cutting-edge products and technologies, improve accessibility of capital for our SMEs in the pharma sector, strengthen and harmonize regulatory systems across regions and countries through the African Medicines Regulatory Harmonization and the African Medicines Agency. And lastly, enhance market data collection systems and market access, including through the African Continental Free Trade Area. Through these strategic partnerships and within the framework of the third industrial development decade for Africa, IDDAIII is driving efforts in the design and implementation of the following instruments. 1, Africa Pharma Learning Management System to enhance manufacturing capacity. The Africa Pharma Resource Database. The Fund for African Pharma Sector Development. An annual Africa Pharma Conference as a platform for sharing best practices and policies, providing opportunity for business-to-business linkages and increased investments in the pharma sector. And lastly, Pan-African Vaccine Manufacturing Initiative to increase investments in the manufacture of vaccines in Africa. In addition, we will continue to work with the co-organizers of the upcoming AU Summit on Industrialization and Economic Diversification to ensure ongoing support for building the resilience of AU member states in local pharmaceutical manufacturing and trade, supported by an advanced and competitive health industry. As I conclude, may I convey Dr. Mayaki's best wishes for fruitful deliberations and a very successful high-level event. Thank you for your attention.
And thank you, Jennifer Chiriga, there on behalf of Ibrahim Hassan Mayaki, Chief Executive Officer of IDDAIII. We appreciate that. Up next, we have a video message from His Excellency Gerd Müller. He's Minister for Economic Cooperation and Development in Germany. Take a listen.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Covid-19 besiegen wir nur weltweit oder nicht? 15 Monate nach der ersten Covid-Diagnose, nach dem Ausbruch, sind erst 3% der Menschen in Afrika mit Impfstoffen versorgt. Die Länder mit hohem Einkommen, die Industrieländer, haben sich die meisten Impfdosen gesichert. Wenn wir so weitermachen, bleibt das Gesundheitsrisiko bestehen. Und zwar nicht nur in Afrika, sondern für uns alle, für den Rest der Welt. Denn es werden neue Mutationen entstehen. Weltweit wurden bis jetzt 22 Milliarden Impfdosen produziert. Sie müssen einfach gerecht verteilt werden. Zugang zu Impfstoffen muss jeder erhalten. Das ist ein grundlegendes Recht und ganz besonders auch für die Entwicklungs- und Schwellenländern. Es darf nicht eine Frage des Geldes sein. Wir haben die Organisation COVAX und den Accelerator und es ist ein Skandal, dass diese wundervollen Organisationen zur Verteilung der Impfstoffe nach wie vor mit Milliarden unterfinanziert sind. Deutschland fördert COVAX und den Accelerator, aber wir investieren auch in Kooperation mit Ländern wie Südafrika, dem Senegal und Ghana zum Aufbau eigener Impfstoffproduktionen. Das ist zentral wichtig und wir unterstützen, dass auch China und andere Länder sich auf diesen Weg machen. Lasst uns zusammenarbeiten. China, Afrika, Lateinamerika, die ganze Welt, wir alle sind von Zoonosen betroffen und haben das gemeinsame Interesse an der Forschung und Schutzmaßnahmen. Dies ist voraussichtlich nicht die letzte Pandemie. Kooperation, nur Zusammenarbeit weltweit hilft. Was brauchen wir? Investitionen in die Gesundheitssysteme, die Verbesserung der medizinischen Kapazität, den Aufbau von Impfungen, von Impfstrategien, nicht nur jetzt aktuell gegen die Covid-Pandemie, auch bei Malaria, HIV, Tuberkulose und seltenen Tropenkrankheiten. Es ist großartig, dass BioNTech in Kooperation mit Pfizer diesen Impfstoff entwickelt hat und jetzt es auch die Perspektive gibt, auf der neuen Basis der mRNA-Impfstoffe vielleicht auch in naher Zukunft Impfstoffe gegen Malaria und andere Krankheiten zu erhalten. Wir brauchen eine Initiative, einen Aufbruch, Impfstoff made in Afrika. Und dazu ist es nötig, eine eigenständige Industrieproduktion auf dem Kontinent voranzubringen. Nicht nur Impfstoffe, auch Medikamente in Zukunft. Und wir brauchen dazu Investitionen, Technologietransfer und Zusammenarbeit für den Aufbau von Produktionskapazitäten und Logistik vor Ort. Es gibt gute Schritte, gute Initiativen und erste Erfolge. Aber es ist an der Zeit, noch mehr zu tun, um gemeinsam zum Ziel zu kommen. Als nächstes diese Covid-Pandemie gemeinsam weltweit zu besiegen. Und darüber hinaus das Thema Gesundheit, Stärkung der Gesundheitsstrukturen zu einem essentiellen Ziel unserer Zusammenarbeit zu machen. Vielen herzlichen Dank.
Vielen Dank. Good. Thank you so much, Excellency Gerd Muller, the Minister for Economic Cooperation and Development in Germany. Dankeschön, as they say in Germany. Very well. Just to summarize what he said, everyone should have this access to the vaccine. Let's all work together. Up next, Mr. Martin Seychelles is Deputy Director General, INTPA, European Commission. Martin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Your Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues. The crisis has shown the importance of our work to scale up global manufacturing. In addition to vaccines, we also need to enhance access to diagnostics, therapeutics, particularly to low and lower middle income countries, especially in Africa. And we must strengthen health systems in these countries to better respond to future pandemics and indeed to other diseases as well. We must therefore bolster the ongoing efforts to produce vaccines for Africa, in Africa, and help realize the African Union's objective to produce 60% of all its vaccines by 2040. As Team Europe, we are taking concrete steps in this direction. Together with our member states and with the European Investment Bank, we have engaged in an initiative on manufacturing and access to vaccines, medicines, and health technologies in Africa. The EU budget will contribute with an initial investment of at least 1 billion euros that will be further increased with other contributions from member states and European financial institutions. Through this Team Europe initiative, we are proposing a 360-degree approach to tackle all barriers to innovation and local production of health products. And we're already working on concrete deliverables for this year by boosting vaccine manufacturing in a number of countries like Senegal, Rwanda, South Africa, and Ghana. And we're also following opportunities in other countries to make sure that nobody is left behind and that access to essential health products and technologies is equitable. We must advance as quickly and as concretely as possible, and we need to do this jointly with the private sector. The recent announcement by BioNTech is a very good example of what can be done, and we are confident that this will inspire others to follow. In the near future, we will continue to engage with partners at continental and national level in three main areas of activity. First, scaling up local manufacturing namely facilitating technology transfer, research, and upgrading of manufacturing sites. Secondly, to help defragment and consolidate demand for locally produced medical products. And thirdly, creating the right incentives and the right enabling environment, especially the regulatory environment, so important for such a highly regulated sector. And in this context, the European Union itself, a regional pharmaceutical regulatory system, stands ready to fully support African regulatory bodies at national and regional levels. We remain committed, fully committed, to join forces with all of you to maximize impact and pursue our common goals and values. Thank you.
And thank you, Martin Seychelles. Thanks for the European Commission's continued support for the continent. We appreciate that. Finally, in this section, I'd like to invite Professor Stanley Okolo. He's the Director General of the West African Health Organization. Professor, I know you've been very patiently sitting there, waiting to give your remarks. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Jeff, and Your Excellency, the President of Burkina Faso, where West Africa Health Organization has its headquarters. Your Excellency, good to see you, and Your Excellencies, all protocols observed. ECOWAS Regional Pharmaceutical Production Plan 2014 to 2024 envisages that we would have regional production of pharmaceuticals in a very short time. Now, of the 5 thematic areas of focus of WAHO, pharmaceuticals and vaccines is one of them, and that is the importance that we give to this. We have been working very closely with UNIDO, and for this, I absolutely thank again the Director General of UNIDO, Lee Young, for the work we have done together and the work we are continuing to do in having assessed over 165 pharmaceutical companies in the West Africa region, in fact, including all the pharmaceutical companies in 14 countries of ECOWAS and a sampling of those in Nigeria. Our work showed that we're required to raise quality, and therefore you need to help us to create roadmaps for each country so that we can actually drive up the quality. But we have also in this process continued to train the national medicines quality control laboratories so that there is that aspect of having to ensure that the quality of medicines that come into our region is also of the top standard. One of the things that had not been highlighted is the fact that there is a joint enterprise, and it's a joint enterprise in criminality between those who are bringing falsified drugs and those who are bringing in illicit drugs. And at WAHO, we work with the Open Society Initiative for West Africa to look at the supply chain management and trace the destinations of some of these illicit drugs that come into our country. So the problem of drug abuse in our region is also compounded with the problem of importation of falsified drugs. However, there is work that is ongoing in terms of what we have done to create the incentives. And the first is that we are now the second region in Africa that has achieved the medicines regulation harmonization platform as a precursor, of course, to EMA and to Africa Medicines Agency. We also have a very robust traditional medicine, and it is important that this is really given a pride of place in this, because one of the things that we have to think of in driving manufacture of drugs in Africa is APIs, the active pharmaceutical ingredients. And we've got to be thinking about that, because even if we put up the industry and put up all the pharmaceutical, and we don't have a way of making sure that the APIs are produced in commercial quantity, they will still have to be imported. And that in itself is something that WAHO, in collaboration, is working on. And finally, we are looking at the fact that we would hope that incentives will come into this. And what do we mean by incentives? Incentives are not just by what we have done in trying to create a unified market of 400 million people who are the population of ECOWAS across 15 countries through the harmonized registration. But we're also looking at incentives that ECOWAS itself has created in terms of tax-free incentives, but also, I think, going quality and incentives, it's important that our states, our member states, legislate now to ensure that we iron out those pharmaceutical industries who are not manufacturing with GMP-A or GMP-B. They could be pulled up to GMP-A, good manufacturing practices, because by removing the mushrooming pharmaceutical industries, the bigger industries will come to the fore and therefore manufacture to scale. I'm grateful to Africa Development Bank, Afrexim Bank, and others who are supporting us in terms of now bringing investment to those top-level manufacturing companies that are in our region. Regarding the vaccines, we have worked through a vaccine task force in WAHO to identify countries, and not just countries actually, but specific manufacturing enterprises that we think will benefit from collaboration to produce vaccines. And we're very grateful to Germany for announcing that they will be supporting IPD in Senegal and the industry in Ghana. We still have two in Nigeria, and we're looking at how to support this within the next 6 to 9 months to ensure that we have these manufacturing hubs. We have also supported IPD to produce diagnostics for us during the COVID-19, so that we now have our West Africa produced RDTs, which will be used to try and open our borders. And thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you for associating the West Africa Health Organization with this wonderful initiative, which is timely and urgent. Thank you.
And thank you, Professor Stanley Okolo, Director General, West Africa Health Organization. Thank you for your contribution. We really appreciate that. Really appreciate the fact that you have been with us all this time, folks. Thank you so much for your patience, because this is a very important topic. You know that, we know that. That's why we're all meeting at this third industrial development decade for Africa. We're going to go on straight to session 2. And this session is entitled Strengthening Africa's Pharmaceutical Sector, the Interface Between Public Health and Industrial Development. And let me just mention the folks who are going to be in this panel. I've got Martin Frieda, Coordinator for Vaccine Research, WHO. I've got Abdul Mukhtar, Director, African National Bank, African Development Bank. Emmanuel Mujuru, Chair, Africa Federation of African Pharmaceutical Manufacturers Association. We've got Mr. Greg Perry, Assistant Director General, International Federation for Pharmaceutical Manufacturers Association. Stephen Saad, Chief Executive Officer, Aspen Pharmacare. Robert Koopman, Chief Economist and Director of Economic Research and Statistics Division at the WTO, and Dr. Janet Biaruhanga, Senior Program Officer, AUDA NEPAD, and Dr. Radwa El Munir. She's the Head of Central Administration of Pharmaceutical Policies and Market Access, and Supervisor of Central Administration, Chairman Office, Egyptian Drug Authority. Martin Frieda, let me go to you first. What role, would you tell me, does the pharmaceutical and vaccine industry in Africa have in improving health security, and how can we ensure that strengthening the sector remains a long-term priority, sir?
Okay, so thanks, Jeff, and to all of the distinguished participants here, thank you very much for inviting me. So I think a lot of the speakers we've just heard have highlighted something critical, that vaccine nationalism, which we've seen in the last 2 years, has really highlighted the inequity, and especially in Africa, that those without production capacity are the last in line. Now, this isn't the first time we saw it. We saw it with H1N1, 2009. We even saw it back in 1974 with an influenza outbreak. So we need to strengthen the sector, but strengthening the sector, I want to emphasize, is a balancing act. We cannot in Africa have 54 countries all producing vaccines, because this will result in 54 white elephants, lots of investments that are lost. So who gets to produce the vaccines? And what vaccines do they produce? And most critically, how do we make this sustainable? So sustainability is, from our perspective, the biggest challenge. And one of the reasons for this is that when we produce vaccines, and to maybe less extent other drugs, there is a huge economy of scale. So if we're making vaccines for just one country, the cost of producing those vaccines, unless the country is enormous, like China or India, if we're making for one country, the cost of producing the vaccines is much higher than if the country was to procure them on the international market. So small, medium facilities for national needs are not good. What we need here is a regional approach. Now, the regional plan where it needs to have a country that is producing for the region, but then a commitment from the neighboring countries within the region they're going to procure. And what is really critical here is to recognize that that procurement is going to be at a premium. So in order for us to get sustainability, we need a regional plan. This regional plan needs to be coherent of who gets to produce and who gets to procure. And the long-term commitment that this procurement is going to have to be done at a premium above the international tender price. So this is very complex, and this means that one country by itself can't do it, and this is going to require the support and the leadership of groups such as the African Union to build these regionally coherent plans. But even if we build these facilities and we've got these plans, this is insufficient. The next critical factor are the regulatory agencies. Unless people have trust in the regulatory agencies, they will not be wanting to procure the vaccines or be using the vaccines. So WHO is working with many African countries to strengthen the regulatory agencies to get them up to maturity level, these maturity level 3 or hopefully maturity level 4. Then we need a workforce. We cannot talk about building vaccine factories, such as being mentioned, unless there is a workforce that is ready to work in these. And WHO will be announcing in about 10 days' time a call for expression of interest for whoever wants to be hosting a global workforce training hub for vaccines and for other biologicals. And then very critically, we need technology transfer. You will have seen that WHO with our partners, we are doing technology transfer for mRNA vaccines to a number of countries around the world, very specifically beginning in Africa, in South Africa. But this is all good, but in the long run, what we really want is R&D. We want vaccines developed in Africa for African needs that are really addressing the African requirements. So really in conclusion, in order for us to sustain vaccine manufacturing in Africa to meet the population needs, we need a coherency in our policy between what we want in health, so coherency between our health policy and our industrial policy. But this must not only be at the national level, this must be at the regional level. So I'd like to really once again thank the leadership from the African Union, the African CDC, and our Afro office of WHO of trying to help us create this regional coherent plan. And I think this is the way forwards. So back to you, Jeff. Thank you.
Absolutely, Martin. Thank you so much. Martin Frieda, coordinator for vaccine research at WHO, says it's a balancing act. We cannot have 54 white elephants. That pretty much nails it. Let me go to Dr. Janet Biaruhanga, Senior Program Officer, AUDA NEPAD. Dr. Biaruhanga, your thoughts on that? I think, Martin Frieda has really nailed, you can't have 54 white elephants across the continent.
Thank you so much, Jeff, and thanks the previous speakers for very, very informative deliberations. So far, we have spoken, indeed, from various speakers since the last few hours. We know what the problem is. We don't seem to not know what the solution should be. So we know what the problem is, we know what the solutions are, we know how to package them for the benefit of this continent. What needs to happen really is for us to translate all of these packages into actual work on the ground and put the boots on and get the work done and coordinate this effort. It's evident right now that different organizations are putting in resources to advance the local manufacture of medical products, ranging from vaccines to other biologicals, to medical equipment, to other supplies, to the generic medicines and all of that. However, what we need to now do is to ensure that all of this is well coordinated so that there is systematic coordination and that there's less duplication of effort and there is good use of the limited resources we already are struggling with and grappling with on the African continent. We've talked about the need for policy coherence. We've seen the commitment really of many governments, even on this platform, putting in the necessary effort to develop national sector-specific strategies for the pharmaceutical sector development. For example, what Kenya and Ethiopia and Madagascar are speaking about. We have seen at the regional level, the West African Commission and WAHO and the SADC and the EAC, they're developing regional strategies. So we're not short of strategies to be implemented in this sector. We're also seeing efforts by the partners to support Africa's efforts. And the partners range from the EU to the US to Asia, everywhere. What needs to happen now? We need to see that all of these efforts really come to fruition and that we have the medicines that Africa requires in the quantities that they require them in a sustainable manner, and that they should be of good quality and they should be affordable to those who need them. The regulatory systems are already being strengthened via the AMA and the AMRH initiatives. There's just so many initiatives, to be honest, Jeff. So maybe at the end of this conversation, Jeff, we should say to ourselves, how many more commitments do we need to co-sign before we can actually see the real tangible results that Africa needs to see within the next decade? We have timed ourselves, we know what to do, we know how to do it, we just need to start doing it. And for sure, Jeff, if all the partners seated around this table agree to actualize what we have been saying is hold to ours, we will be able to move the needle. And I am optimistic, having been in this space of work for the last many years, since 2005, when the heads of state agreed to develop this industry. I am optimistic that we are making the right noises and we are moving in the right direction. And soon or later, we will see Africa being able to produce the medicines and vaccines that we require on this continent. I thank you, Jeff, and everybody else.
Dr. Genevieve Aranga, you just nailed it there. It's time to stop talking the talk and start walking the walk. Let me go to Stephen Saad, Chief Executive Officer, Aspen Pharmacare. Stephen, you know, Aspen has a fill and finish agreement with Johnson & Johnson and is the largest African pharmaceutical manufacturer. The question is, what lessons can be learned from Aspen's journey for strengthening the industry on the continent? And what would you like to see happen to stimulate technology transfer agreements?
Yeah, I think, thank you, Jeff, and thank you everyone else and all the insights have been fantastic, and it's been really interesting to see the unity across the continent and unity of purpose. I think from Aspen point of view, we see things have quite an interesting insight because we're a multinational pharma company, but we're headquartered in Africa. And we've had lots of perspectives because we've been through ARVs, multi-drug resistant TB, and now with COVID, we were world leaders supplying dexamethasone anesthetics, and now we're part of a COVID vaccine. And much of this has been done, and we'll get to technology transfers through global partnerships, where we've either worked with multinationals or acquired IP. I mean, what is clear is that we don't have to debate this. Everyone else has said it. Capacitating Africa is key, and it's a key swing factor. If you think about the amount of production we make, and all our production now goes to Africa, and it really gives you a demonstration of how important location is. Because if we weren't in Africa, would our production have gone to Africa? To date, at Aspen, we've really funded all our own CapEx, and we've built significant infrastructure. And we made a commitment to want to be able to get one African, one vaccine. And that would need us to raise our capacity to 1.3 billion from the current 450 odd million that we got, which we can achieve over the next year or two. Talking about action rather than words and talk shop. So and that's what we want to be a part of. We've always been a part of action. We were the first ARV globally, a generic ARV that was approved by the FDA. So how do you get commercial payback? And I think I was very fascinated to hear Mr. Martin Fried from WHO. He sort of hit all the key points. You need sustainable volumes. And sustainable volumes are key. It's no use having COVID and then it goes away and then everyone forgets and the storm moves on and something else happens and we're having another talk shop on something different. But it's also important because if you have volumes, people get experience, and that's important because so much is about your people in this. So how do we achieve sustainable volumes? I believe much of it's in the hand of multilateral procurers. You can shift with, if you look at shifts in offtakes, it can help drive both access and price. No, you can't have 54 factories in Africa. You can, but they're not going to be successful. But let's also not forget that a lot of these products are consumer products. A vaccine is a consumer product, and Africa has got so many people. And the demand within Africa can shape markets and can be assigned proactively to African capacity. And really, it goes to the sense of looking after each other and having some certainty on volume and the volume demand so that in future, we never left behind. Technology transfers are critical. If I consider our partnership with J&J, they showed real commitment to skills transfers. That was really important. And I must tell you with all humility, their payback has been great from Aspen, because of the 11 manufacturers globally, most of them in Europe and the US, Aspen has become their largest and most reliable partner. They actually referred to us in the last present webinars as the jewel in the crown of their manufacturing network. So this dispels certain myths. Let's face it, there are myths out there that these things can't be done in Africa, can't be made. I think that really showed it can be made in Africa, it can be top of class, and it can be the best in the world. And it underscores the need, really. There's two things here. We keep talking about infrastructure. Some panelists have talked about human capital. And once again, I was very happy to hear the story about investing in human capital, because without both, you really don't have a ticket, and you'll reinforce some of the stereotypes that currently exist. What I think is important, I've heard some speakers from Europe talk about BioNTech and J&J and the likes. And for us, what we're really looking at with J&J, which we think is critical, is the opportunity to license the IP. I believe a license will be a game changer. We're in discussions, we're in fairly advanced discussions. If the license is successful, by Q1 next year, we've got 35 to 40 million doses, which we can determine because it's now our license where we supply. And that's all that capacity supplied to Africa and supplied determined from within Africa. So what we should be considering here is how do we look after those people that look after African companies and Africa internal? And so, there must be some licenses for them shaping this. And certainly giving a license and paying a royalty or a fee per dose or something like that will incentivize the people, because they would have more volume than they wouldn't ordinarily have, or more income. I think we've got to learn lessons from the pandemic, that no one company or country should be responsible for our country's supply. I also go back to one of the earlier comments. There needs to be regional hubs. In addition, not every country, as I said, can be selected to make a vaccine, but as economies of scale are really important. A lot of Africa have asked us, can we do partnerships? Do we see an opportunity for partnerships? And we do, and we think we can give you potential to add real value to a more secure partnership here and business case. Aspen is one of the largest manufacturers of anesthetics globally, and anesthetics often also come in vials or ampules, which fit into a vaccine facility. And this is something we need to sit. How do we keep these factories warm? Well, maybe if there's no COVID, we can make anesthetics together across the continent for the continent. So there are other sterile products we can consider, and we need to look at how we can effectively partner and assist other players of the continent. We are committed to share our experiences and learnings to the extent we can and have, and we'll be guided by the African CDC and others where this is best applied. But if there's one thing I leave you with, I stress we really need to invest in human capital. This is important for the industry, and it's important that the universities provide graduates for us out of here. So I think those are key learnings for us to date. We're learning every day, Jeff. Every day is a new day and a new experience. But we're really proud to have represented Africa well, to show it can be done, and to take it to the next step where we have some type of license and control, autonomy over where this product goes. And it's something that we think we can maybe assist the continent with to the extent there's help required.
Absolutely, Stephen, very well put, and great job you guys are doing there at Aspen. I know you have to run, Stephen, so real quick, let me ask you, if you get that license, when you get that license, will that be a game changer for the continent?
I think it is a game changer for the continent because we will be able to take our capacity within another 6 to 9 months up to 700 million doses. And so, 700 by that's, 60, nearly 55 to 60 million doses, and I'm talking J&J doses a month, even more Pfizer or Moderna, because they fit more doses in a vial. But that's massive change. And even in the Q1 next year, if we're producing 35 to 40 million doses a month, that's a lot of doses. I mean, it's in Africa and we've seen, if you don't support, if we get corralled into COVAX, and COVAX gets supported by India largely, and then India can't supply because they've got their own problems, look where we were left with. So I'm not going to repeat what everyone else before has understood the importance of capacitating Africa. We were a little bit unfortunate because the API producer in the US, there was a risk of contamination. So we destroyed nearly 30 odd million doses at that time, and we were short supplied on the drug supply. But, by the end of this year, we'd have made well over 120, 130 million doses, even with a short supply. And so that's, I think, and that's very important for Africa. And we can really ramp it up going into the new year as well.
Absolutely. Stephen Saad, the Chief Executive Officer, Aspen Pharmacare. Let me switch now to Emmanuel Mujuru. He's the chair of the Federation of African Pharmaceutical Manufacturers Associations. Emmanuel, you heard what Stephen Saad just said right there. The question to you is, what do you see as the main needs strengthening of the pharmaceutical industry in Africa?
Thank you, Jeff. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, colleagues. The context in which pharmaceutical production takes place, not only in Africa, but in the world in general, is determined by a number of actors that constitute what we call the pharmaceutical manufacturing system, or clusters or value chains. These include, but not limited to, manufacturers themselves, national medicines regulatory agencies, suppliers, buyers, training institutions, distributors, government, and financial institutions, among others. The combined impact of these actors and policy environment shapes the manufacturing environment, and it determines the fate of local pharmaceutical production, including the competitiveness of the industry and attractiveness to investment or capital. In order of importance, FAPMA ranks the following as being critical to the sustainability, growth, and hence competitiveness of pharmaceutical production in Africa: access to finance, market access, human skills, technological transfer, medicines regulation, and policy environment. Access to finance of long-term nature at low interest rates and in foreign or hard currency remain major challenges stifling the growth of industry. Innovative and viable solutions to Africa's medical products needs, including production, die as stillbirth because of failure to access finance and lack of market, and also because of unfavorable policy environment. Access to finance has been described as the Achilles heel of African pharma, hence the initiative by FAPMA and other players, including AUC, AUDA, NEPAD, to come up with the FAPID-D concept, Fund for African Pharma Development. Also key is market access. The pharma industry is a capital, skills-intensive, and knowledge-driven industry. It is therefore a very expensive undertaking. To that end, there should be a readily accessible market for investment to be attracted to pharma production in Africa. One of the major drivers that led to the record-breaking development and production of COVID-19 vaccines was the support given in the form of financial grants and a readily available market to companies that invested in coming up with the COVID-19 vaccine, that is in the US and among other countries. Africa, therefore, should not be an exception. One of the major impediments to pharma development in Africa was fragmented markets, limited to within the borders of an individual country. In most cases, and of course with exceptions, these markets were too small and unattractive for any meaningful investment in pharma production. This was also compounded by the non-tariff barriers, sometimes of regulatory nature and also of trade nature. And this is now being addressed by regulatory harmonization at regional and continental level with the birth of the Africa Medicines Agency, AMA, and its ratification by a number of African countries. This will make it attractive for African pharma companies to establish manufacturing hubs supplying regional and continental markets. Investments of high capital nature are required for the production of specialized and economies of scale products such as vaccines, COVID-19, oncology, hormonal, and active pharmaceutical ingredients, among others, will become attractive. The pharma industry is skills intensive. This therefore means that there should be highly educated, skilled human resources for the development and production of pharmaceutical products in Africa. If indeed Africa was to be competitive in that respect, the capacity to adapt recent technologies and IPs, intellectual property, is very important. More and closer collaboration in research, training, and skills development is therefore required between African pharma companies and universities and the centers of higher learning, among others, with central government playing a role of a facilitator. This should be at regional and continental level in order to develop the critical skills basis. Incentives should also be given to companies that make such investment. It should be made easier to hire expatriates to facilitate skills transfer from within Africa and outside Africa. Alignment of various policies that affect pharma production is very important. That means alignment of the public health policies, industrial development policies, trade policies, skills development policies, and taxation policies, among others, to ensure the creation of an enabling policy environment for pharma production in Africa. The policies should speak to each other. They should be policy literacy. Is also important among the civil servants and regulators. The COVID-19 experience has exposed the risk of centralization of production and supply of medical products in one part of the world at the expense of diversification across the globe. The advantage of proximity of supply in the African pharma production context was also brought into prominence. With that, Jeff, I would like to thank you for hosting us as African partner, and also also have been very much excited with the contribution from Africa Development Bank, where they pointed out that they're going to have $11 billion available in the next 10 years to support Africa pharma production. With that, thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chairman. That's Emmanuel Mujuri, the Chairman of the Federation of African Pharmaceutical Manufacturers Association. I'd like to switch over to Greg Perry. He's the Assistant Director General, International Federation of Pharmaceutical Manufacturers Association. Now, your association members have been very central to developing vaccines against COVID-19. But what can be done differently to ensure that innovation can be rapidly available in Africa? Greg?
Thank you. In a sense, I don't want to repeat everything that was just mentioned by Emmanuel and Stephen. I think we 100% agree with all the points which were made there, and that is essentially about establishing the correct environment, ecosystem on the continent that will enable the attraction of investment from global operators, as well as being able to get local operators to be efficient and active and sustainable. So all those issues that were raised by Stephen and Emmanuel now, almost word for word, I think we as a global industry can agree to. Now, an interesting thing about the success and the development of the vaccines that we've done for COVID-19, and this was done within a year of the pandemic, having the manufacturing sites up, the development of the products, the registration of the products, and from the sort of the end of last year till now, it's actually up to about 7 billion that has been produced, and we're on for over 11 billion by the end of the year. Now, what's interesting in that is, of course, there were partnerships, a lot of partnerships that were involved in that. Some 300 collaborations were involved, 215 tech transfers were involved in that. From the developing world in general, it must be noted that about 50% of the vaccines are produced in developing countries. So there are a lot of cooperation, a lot of partnerships, a lot of activity in developing countries. But I think we've got to shoot from that into Africa. And it's absolutely clear that I think we all share the aspiration that Africa needs to be more self-dependent on vaccine manufacturing, because if there is a future pandemic, we can't be stuck in the same position has been the case now. And that need for health security is something that is shared here. The question is how that's going to be done. We know it's long-term. We know it has to be sustainable. It's something that Martin has mentioned before and repeated again by Stephen. It has to be sustainable. And we must ensure that it's properly demand-based. Yeah, and we want to work towards that on a long-term basis. So what are those factors? Well, the factors, as I said, are already outlined, but I think a couple of points I want to raise from a global industry point of view is why would an industry want to invest or feel comfortable? It needs to have a number of things that are key. It needs to have viable markets. It needs to have political stability. It has to have government transparency. It needs to have appropriate capital markets. It has to have an innovative, friendly environment. It has to have the high adherence to regulatory standards, skilled workforce, and clear economic development priorities of a government. But as regards the individual that you're going to team up with and do the tech transfer, you have to have what's called a suitable local partner. Trusted skills sets from that partner, the ability to absorb tech transfer. And in the case of vaccines, that's quite skilled and detailed tech transfer. You need to have the capacity, the GMP standards, and the business and ethical standards. And as we've seen, companies such as J&J and BioNTech are linking up on the continent with companies that they feel that, are able to be that trusted partner. And it was great to hear from Stephen his viewpoints and his relationship with J&J. I think just to finalize, there are some very good milestones which are being developed. The African Continental Free Trade area, that's going to be pretty significant in dealing with this current problem of we're dealing with 50 plus countries and markets. No, we can actually probably operate now on a regional and continental stage. It's early days yet. Obviously, there's a strengthening of African institutions. The CDC, African CDC, has played an absolutely amazing leadership role on the continent, and that is being observed by everybody. And congratulations there. And I think other institutions like the African Development Bank are also showing this leadership, which shows the importance of having strong government structures there. And of course, we have a new growing generation in Africa, which is looking more towards innovation, looking more towards science, looking more to entrepreneurship. And my final point is the private sector. We've heard from Stephen, we've heard from Emmanuel. The way forward on this is to create that environment for the private sector to operate and deliver, often in partnership with the public sector, but we need to have that economic environment. And that's how I think we will make this significant move forward. We've seen it in the case of Aspen, we've seen it in the case of others. It can be done, it will be done, but we need that ecosystem.
Absolutely, Greg. Spot on. More self-dependence when it comes to vaccine production. Thanks so much, Greg. Everybody seems to be speaking the same language and on the same page. Dr. Radwa El Munir, let me go to you in Egypt. What's been the Egyptian experience? You heard what everyone is saying here today, and we all seem to be on the same page. What's been the Egyptian experience?
Thank you for having me in this event. And please let me share with you and the esteemed ladies and attendees. And capitalizing on what we have discussed so far in this meeting, let me share with you the Egyptian Drug Authority, the IDDAIII, how we see the pharmaceutical industry. We see the pharmaceutical industry as a double-sided industry. On one side, it's a strategic industry that impacts people's health and well-being. On the other side, it's a great investment-based industry that contributes to economic development. The single strategy that enabled us in the IDDAIII to support both sides hand in hand was through encouraging and supporting the pharmaceutical industry localization. Let me share with you that while the world is still grappling with COVID-19, we were honored that the Egyptian some Egyptian experience and success story of pharmaceutical localization and its impact on enhanced market access through 4 interconnected dimensions, starting from launch time, very, very rapid launch time, low cost, which directly lead to the 3rd dimension of enhanced available quantities. And all those 3 dimensions integrate towards building a successful and profitable business model as a key driving factor for a sustainable investment and hence economic development. The example that I'm going to share is the localization of remdesivir vial, which has been approved by the FDA in May 2020 for treating COVID suspected cases and capitalizing on 3 key success factors: strategic wealth, advanced and flexible regulatory framework, and good industrial foundation and technical support. The EDA was able to support remdesivir registration and local manufacturing. We issued our first EUL in June 2020, only 1 month apart from the FDA approval. And then in a few months apart, we launched another 4 products. So this is the quick access. When you are talking about the price, due to localization, we managed to provide remdesivir vials in the Egyptian market with only 10 to 20% of its international market prices. When it comes to quantity, during this pandemic, the local manufacturer were able to supply all the quantities needed in the local market. They supported more than 800,000 vials in the local market, in addition to what has been exported, around 900,000 vials. Let me conclude my talk with the African proverb: if you want to go fast, go alone, and if you want to go far, go together. And with the serious steps that many African countries are taking toward establishing and enforcing the African Medicine Agency in order to harmonize the pharmaceutical regulation as a key step to enhance and facilitate intra-continent market access, I think it's time to collaborate, replicate the Egyptian experience, and capitalize on the African production lines localized in Egypt. Moreover, we can mobilize all our efforts to have a strong partnership to establish another manufacturing site, another manufacturing hub in another African country for Africa to Africa manufacturing. COVID-19, let me conclude that COVID-19 is not the only pandemic affecting the continent. We still have HIV, TB, malaria. All of these diseases continue to plague many countries, and mere dependence on import will continue to tighten the supply. It's time for Africa pharmaceutical localization. Thank you so much.
Dr. Radwa El Munir, 100%. If you want to go far, thank you so much. We appreciate your contribution. Let me go to Robert Koopman, Chief Economist and Director of the Economic Research and Statistics Division at the World Trade Organization. Robert, thank you so much for your patience. The question is, given the impact of COVID-19, should vaccine policy be considered in the context of broader economic policy considerations for this and future pandemics?
Hi, Jeff. Well, thanks very much. It's a great opportunity to share some insights from a WTO perspective with you. I must say, I've agreed with many of the interventions I've heard earlier, particularly around the need for regional integration, but also a rational approach to building out this capacity in Africa. I think it's very important to realize that vaccine policy is economic policy. If you want to have a good economic recovery, you need to get your populations vaccinated and back to work. And it's not just in one country, it's across countries because of the interconnectivity and globalized world that we live in. It's very important that goods and services and people be able to flow across borders. Now, that reminds me, in terms of this Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, it's a very important opportunity for the continent to improve its regional integration. When you look at Africa, it is one of those regions of the world that is under-integrated. And that's not a good thing for global competitiveness. So a focus on integrating the African continent will strengthen many of your industries and service sectors and improve lives, I believe. That relates to the vaccine production capabilities also. Now, some of the work that we've done here at the WTO has been to look at some of the trade impediments around the movement of vaccines and their ingredients in particular. And what we find is that in Africa, there are fairly high tariffs on many of the inputs, the parts, the components that one needs to be a successful vaccine producer. Those tariffs apply within the integrated, within a potentially integrated African market, but also to outside provider of those parts and components and ingredients. And even with successful integration in Africa, you're going to need to rely on global supply chains. The large producers of these vaccines currently in the United States, in Europe, in India, in China, all rely on trade. They may produce a final vaccine and be able to ship it and export it, but their supply chains are very, very important. They cross borders. Nobody can do it on their own. So I think it's very important to recognize this and think about this in your rationalization approach to building out this industry in Africa. So that means thinking about comparative advantage across Africa. How can you have a good regional supply chain, but recognizing that even that regional supply chain is not going to provide everything that you need. Know-how, I think we've heard from Aspen, the importance of know-how and the ability of a partnership to help build out that know-how. We at the WTO are part of this multilateral leaders task force, and we work with ACT-A manufacturing task force and various other task forces. And when they look at the ability to diversify, geographically diversify vaccine production, one of the big things is building out this know-how, and that it frequently takes time. So thinking about just removing something like intellectual property is going to fix your vaccine production process. Well, that's kind of like thinking that if somebody hands you a list of ingredients to produce a very excellent meal, that you know how to combine those ingredients and that you have the right kitchen and all the right utensils and things to produce them. You need to have the training, you need to have the expertise, you need to have the equipment to produce these things. And many of those things will come from global supply chains. Increasingly, we hope that there'll be regional supply chains also. I think I'll stop there. Thanks for the opportunity to share this perspective. If there is further interest in understanding the WTO roles here, particularly in vaccines and the COVID environment, we do have a very interesting website. If you Google WTO COVID-19, it'll take you to, I think, a very rich supply of materials that can help inform these very important policy decisions that you're going to be facing. Thank you very much, Jeff.
Thank you, Robert Koopman there. And again, that if you Google WTO COVID-19, you'll get all that information that Robert Koopman, Chief Economist and Director of the Economic Research and Statistics Division at the WTO, was talking about. Abdul Mukhtar, you've been hearing all this conversation all evening. It's all boils down to the CFCTA, Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. It looks like that's where we're all gravitating. That's going to be like the game changer, if you will. Abdul Mukhtar, do you agree?
Yes, Jeff, I think that that people are on track, because when you look at some of the key barriers that when you talk to pharmaceutical manufacturers on the continent, they talk about one of the basic problems is the lack of good logistic and infrastructure that limits regional integration. They talk about difficulty in access to markets, and because markets are so fragmented, they need to be, people have talked about economies of scale and all of that. So the ACFTA, of course, is bringing together, this huge market, 1.3 billion people, potentially 2.5 trillion, 3.4 billion, trillion. Of GDP for the continent. And I think that is really, really key. And that's the African Development Bank actually is one of the key areas. I talked about the pharmaceutical action plan that we're developing for 2030. And one of the key elements, of course, is to try to address that. And that's why, we look at completely mapped the entire continent and say, basically, what kind of infrastructure do you need? Specifically identify that, and we estimate that you need over the next 10 years at least $100 billion in infrastructure investment just to create that logistical integration that you need to create the market, to enable producers. One of the areas that we've also looked at, and I heard people talk about regional hubs, I think that's really, really important, that you cannot have every country producing their own vaccines. So what we've done in the plan that we've developed is actually we've gone down to identifying which countries should form actually what we call the NAV centers. So we look at the 4 regions of the continent: East, West, South, and North Africa. And in each of those, we identified 1 or 2 maximum countries in each of these regions that we call potentially NAV centers. And then for each of those NAV centers, we identify which countries can potentially be members of that NAV center, where you can easily connect using regional infrastructure and logistical support, so that when you create an industry, pharmaceutical vaccine in one of those countries, you can actually move easily into those bigger markets. The criteria we use, of course, government support and the right policies. We need to have countries that really are serious about this, where the political leadership is well aligned, but also where you have really a huge presence of the private sector. What we've seen is, we talk about the manufacturing on the continent. We've identified about 600 manufacturers on the continent in different groups, from small local manufacturers to large scale manufacturers and global companies that are existing. But 80% of the production that we're talking about here is actually in only 8 countries. That's what we've seen. So there is a huge concentration also. So really identifying those countries where there's already an ongoing activity, where the regulatory environment is strong, where private sector is active and they know what they want, and that's, I think, is key. So our goal, to wrap up, is, and because we're out of time, but I would love to talk more about this, but I'll be happy to share the study and the plan with all partners going forward. But the goal is by 2030, we want to reverse. So this 30% production that we have on the continent currently, we want to move that up to at least 60% by 2030. So 60% of pharmaceuticals to be produced locally on the continent. And this is like a medium term, this is like a middle scenario. We have a very aggressive scenario where if things go well, and we hope that they may, we can even go to like 75% local production by 2030. So many things need to happen. People talk about the key issues around collaboration, around enabling the private sector with the right policies, creating the right R&D environment. Less than 2% of global R&D is currently based in Africa. We need to do more around creating the various capabilities, but also helping companies develop the right quality of products and so on. At the AFDB, one of the things that we're good at, of course, is identifying projects and companies to support. So we've identified many of these private sector players, and we're already working with them. We're talking with them to identify their needs based on financing, using our different instruments in the bank, and see how much they need, what they need, and how they can upscale their manufacturing capabilities. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Abdul Mukhtar. And I hope everyone has that kind of optimism that you have as well. 75% by 2030. That's great optimism. I know we're winding down, folks, and you guys have been extremely patient, and we thank you so much for your time. But I'd like Dr. Janyet Biaruhanga, I want you to give us hope going forward. You said you've been in this business since 2005. We're talking a decade and a half. What do you say going forward on behalf of everything you've heard, everyone you've heard? We're all seem to be on the same page, speaking the same language. Give us some hope going forward, Dr. Janet.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And everybody would like, on behalf of the African Union Development Agency, NEPAD, I just want to say thank you to everybody who has participated in these deliberations, for your contributions, for your repeated advice and recommendation as to what Africa needs to do. I am very optimistic, and as I said at the beginning, this process started in 2005 when the African Union heads of state agreed to develop this pharmaceutical sector. And that was the time when HIV, TB, and malaria had become a serious pandemic on the continent, and we needed to produce our own medical products to respond to those 3 pandemics. Today, we have the COVID-19 triggering once again the conversations around creating the enabling environment for Africa to produce our own medical products and supplies. to give you all the optimism and to create the necessary spirit to continue working together, as all of you have emphasized. I would like to inform you that the commitment politically, really, in a number of member states has been demonstrated. That is very key, political commitment, but we just need to translate that into real action by various countries and regional economic communities. Policy coherence has been echoed over and over. The trade and industry, the health, the finance, the science and technology and education ministries, all of them working together to create the necessary policies that will advance this sector. They're actually work in progress right now in many regional economic communities who have strategies to develop the pharmaceutical sector. Some countries have sound sector-specific strategies, and these are very key long-term going forward if we have to make progress. The skills development, the access to product and technology, the access to affordable capital, and the creation of time-limited incentives, the regulatory system strengthening and enforcement through the African Medicines Agency that is being established, and the ongoing efforts of the African Medicines Regulatory Harmonization Initiative that the IDDAIII spearheads, the partnerships and collaborations that are being fostered across the continent with regard to building the necessary business-to-business linkages, the market access that is being created by the opportunity that the African Continental Free Trade Agreement provides. All of these things are going to result in the competitiveness and sustainability and self-reliance of the African pharmaceutical industry. And above all of that, this is just simply to benefit Africa in terms of access to the much needed medical products that are of good quality, that can be made available to all who need them at an affordable cost. So from our side, we would like to reassure all of the participants in this deliberations that we will continue to work together hand in hand with our partners to ensure that the dream that our African heads of state adopted, and the decision that they adopted back a few years ago in 2005 will actually be realized in the very near future if we all continue to put our efforts together, both at the national level, at the regional level, regional economic community level, and continent-wide, and thank the global partners who are willing and able to continue supporting these efforts. We all need to work together, to collaborate, and to be systematic and deliberate in how we use the limited resources that are being placed forward for this industry by our governments. And we will continue to also engage the private sector and harness their very important role going forward. I want to thank you so much, Jeff, also for ably moderating this session. Thank you, and over to you again.
Thank you, Dr. Janet Biaruhanga. They're saying all hands need to be on deck. That's the bottom line. All hands on deck. Otherwise, even like Dr. Radwa was saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. It's been an incredible session, folks. Thank you so much for being part of this high-level event for the third industrial development decade for Africa, 2016 to 2025. By the way, there will be a joint communique issued. I think you should all have a copy of it somewhere there. It should be one on the screen, a joint communique on the steps moving forward. Where do we go from here? What are the next steps? It's up to us. It's up to you. It's up to each and every one of us taking part. And we want to thank the United Nations Industrial Development Organization and my good friend, the DG, Lee Young, and his entire team for organizing this event. I'd like to thank Victor Njemba, Claudia, Wema, Alistair, the entire team. Thank you for putting this event together, because this is the only way we can move forward as a continent. You all know that, we all know that nothing happens by accident. We all move forward together. Thank you so much, folks, for being a part of this event. And let's keep tweeting. By the way, the hashtag is hashtag IDDA or hashtag UNGA. Again, hashtag IDDA, hashtag UNGA, as in UN General Assembly. Thank you so much, folks, for your contributions, everybody. Goodbye, good luck. God bless you all.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Well done. Yeah. I think
well done, Victor.
Very informative, great exchange.
Great.
It's really call for action.
Yes.
Really call for action.
And everyone's on the same page, you know,
everyone on the same page, more or less, convergence of views.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, everybody. Well done.
I think probably we could have okay, let me reply to a call quickly. Yes.